In this movie, I'll show you some really handy tricks for changing the size of selected text from the keyboard. I've saved my changes as TrajanType.ai. Now, before we resize the text, and we're going to be resizing this top line so it's a little bigger, I want to go ahead and move my text into a better location. So I'm going to go ahead and drag it by its point, by that little sort of anchor point that is the alignment point for the text, until it snaps into alignment with the upper left corner of the margin. And then I'll press Shift down arrow 5 times in a row. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And then I'll press the up arrow key by itself in order to raise that type just a little bit. And this will end up looking exactly right once we get done changing the type size. So now I'm going to double click inside of my text in order to switch to the type tool and set the location of the blinking insertion marker. And then I'll triple click on that first line of type to select it. Now here's how to change the size of the type. Press Control-Shift period. That would be Command-Shift period on the Mac. And that makes the type get incrementally bigger, as you can see here. Now, the reason it's Control-Shift period is because that's the location of the greater than sign on an American keyboard. To make your text incrementally smaller, you press Control-Shift comma or Command-Shift comma on the Mac. And the comma key is also the location of the less than symbol on an American keyboard. So Control-Shift period or Command-Shift period makes it bigger. Control-Shift or Command-Shift comma makes it smaller. And it does so in increments of 2 points by default, which I think is too much. I prefer finer control than that. And if you do as well, then you can change the increments by pressing Control-K or Command-K on the Mac to once again bring up the Preferences dialog box. And notice there are your increment values. So if I were to click on Size Leading, I'd highlight that 2-point value and I could change it to 0.5 points. And you'll see that this is useful because you can increase the increment on the fly using a different keyboard shortcut that I'll show you in a moment. The tracking value allows you to track or kern your text from the keyboard, which is to say change the amount of horizontal space between characters. And by default, it's set to 21 thousandths of an M. Now, an M is a space that's as wide as the type size is tall. So in other words, if we're working with 24-point type, then you do the math here, 20 thousandths of 24 points is about a half a point. So that's a big increment when you're trying to space characters away from each other. So I prefer to take that value down to 5 thousandths. And then baseline shift allows you to raise and lower the text with respect to the baseline. I recommend you take it down to 0.5 points as well. And then click OK in order to make those changes. And now notice up here in the control panel that the current type size is 64 points. If I press Control-Shift period in order to increase the size of the type, it goes to 64.5. Let's say I want to move more quickly. Well, I can add the Alt key or the Option key on the Mac. So it's basically a mash your fist, in other words. Control-Shift-Alt period or Command-Shift-Option period on the Mac goes ahead and increases that type size by a 5x increment. So in our case, we go from 0.5 to 2.5. And now if I were to press Control-Shift-Alt, comma, or Command-Shift-Option, comma on the Mac, I'd reduce that type size in 2.5-point increments. All right, I can see that my type size is 62. I'm going to press Control-Shift period or Command-Shift period on the Mac 2 times in order to increase that type size value to 63 points, because that's the type size I ultimately arrived at for this particular headline. Now, it may not look quite right because the text looks so wide at this size. Comma's like hanging out of the margin quite a bit, but that's because the text needs to be kerned a little bit. That is, we need to change the horizontal space between the letters, and we will get to that in a future movie. Anyway, I'm going to press the Escape key in order to accept my changes and return to the black arrow tool. In the next movie, we'll format the byline, and along the way, I'll show you how to work with leading and paragraph indent.